get down to the brass tacks of AEA. There's been some changes, big changes. I am pleased to welcome Mike Adamson, the new boss.
Thank you.
Very much unlike the old boss. And Gary Joyce, who joins us as the chairman of the board.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the chairman of the board. It's so much more impressive title, don't you think?
I think it is, yeah.
How they talk you into this gig?
Oh, I don't know. You know, been on the board for quite a few years now. Certainly recall David Loso asking me if I'd like to step up to be the vice chair, and such a privilege, you know, to
tough act to follow.
Absolutely, and it's just been, you know, it's such a, it means so much to me, the association. Okay, and to give back, and then to ultimately give back in the role that I've got now is just, yeah, it's a tremendous privilege. It really is.
Tell me about the role you've played in the avionics community.
What, in history, what I've done previously?
Absolutely.
So I was in the military, did 8 years in the Royal Air Force. Loved that, I had no aviation background prior to that. In fact, it's funny because we spoke about trying to recruit people into the industry. And I just turned up at the school one day, a squadron leader was there, he gave a pitch on avionics, and I was like, and I'd loved tinkering with radios and things, growing up as a kid, and then all of a sudden I was just exposed to this whole new world of, hang on, right, so there's electronics on aircraft. It was like an epiphany for me, you know, and then from there, joining the Air Force, getting into the company that I joined as an engineer and now own, had some involvement. I think I said yesterday in the opening ceremony back in 1999, my first involvement with the AEA, and I was just blown away. You know, just how many people. And as I said in my speech yesterday, I don't know of another industry where people come together and want to share experiences, even with a competitor. You know, and are happy to say, do you know what? I've had this problem. Yep. Here's what I did to solve it. And my first exposure to that was just, I couldn't believe it. I come to the AEA with all these frustrations of things that I couldn't do and needed fixing. And to see that firsthand. And over the years, to keep going to regional meetings, to come to convention, I just thought, you know what, I want to get involved with this.
The industry has learned an important lesson that cooperation gets you a whole lot further down the line than getting into this nasty competition thing. You know? Competition is fine, but there comes a point when you can really help each other out and build something greater than you could otherwise all by yourself.
Yeah, I think so.
It's amazing stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you envision for your role?
I think, and we've spoke about this, that I think in the short term is it's understanding where we are with the association and having that stability that we bring to start with. I think going forward, then we look at what can we offer. You know, what fresh outlook can we take on the association. The association does a pretty good job, quite frankly. So we just need to move that forward a little bit, and we will. And we've spoke about it, and we had some great discussions at our board meeting on Sunday. And the board, a fairly young board that we have at the moment, they really want to get involved in increasing our member benefits. So yeah, fantastic. And I think that's what I want to take. You know, I certainly didn't want to come onto the chairman's position just to sit there and do my time. I certainly want to progress and grow.
You've got kind of a double-edged sword to deal with here, because from our observation, you know, Aero-News has always kind of told it like it is, and sometimes that gets us in trouble and all, but ultimately we get to see who does and who does not walk the walk and so forth. And we've watched AEA over the course of 2 decades do extraordinary things with a surprisingly small staff, all things considered, and do just amazing work. So you have a very well-run, well-organized system in place that you not only have to maintain, but now you've got to try to put your own style and your own mission on it, and try to do something different to the extent of trying to do it better. Tough job.
Tough job. I think so, but I think we're both ready for that challenge, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mike, let me ask you this. Very few organizations have had the kind of change in leadership. I mean, there have been, what, 3
That's correct.
presidents
That's
of AE up till now. It's been heretofore a family organization,
Right.
so you've stepped into that interesting little riddle, and we've seen in a couple of other associations where that's not going so well. As Paula made it clear that it was time to retire, and as it became clear to you that you were going to be taking the reins, what was that transition like? What was it that transpired to make this the right decision for you?
Well, I think it started the day I started. So, you know, we've worked together for 20 years, and I can't tell you I was thinking of the presidency position on day one, but I certainly followed her model and learned from her along the way. She's a fantastic mentor. She knows everybody. She's so knowledgeable about the business, willing to share. So that all has made this transition as smooth as possible. At least it feels that way to me. Hopefully that's visible to the members and you know, to the industry. She is a prime example of what to do, and I've paid close attention over the last 20 years. So I really think that's what's made it easy, is just continuing her legacy of success and making sure we continue to do what we're doing well and explore the new areas that we get feedback from our members to go tackle new things. And so we've got great leadership on the board. It'll make it pretty easy for us.
Well, once again, as I was saying to Gary, it's one of these situations, a double-edged sword. You're given something that works well.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to keep it working well, it's another to put your own stamp on it and try to exceed what has gone before. So what will an Adamson presidency look like for AEA versus the Dirks?
It's a really good question. Especially
totally unfair one too,
especially,
right?
Especially 2 days into the job, right?
2 days.
No pressure.
But it's a valid question, because I think that's something that our members in our industry will have. You know, my focus has been professional development. That's what I came on to the association to do. Workforce development is maybe the newer term for that, or a similar term for that. So I feel like in my tenure, we've done quite a bit to recognize the avionics technician, starting with our work on the AET. Most certainly the recent recognition from the FAA as its formal training for the repairman certificate, which we briefed on. So I really feel like when I leave in 20 some odd years, you'll look back and say, I think he did everything he could to recognize the artisanship, the craftsmanship, the skill, the knowledge, the expertise of the avionics technician. And I think the association's made as many of the right steps as we can. It seems to be accelerating lately with the climate in the FAA and their recognition. Industry consensus standards have helped that, and I think we've got more to do. The next project is probably more on the recruiting side to get that pipeline going. We've got some things in work, obviously, but I would hope that the industry would feel like that's where I left my mark.
For both of you, where do you see the hazards? Where do you see the roadblocks? What are the things that concern you the most in regards to the future of the avionics industry, and more important, to AEA's role?
I think, as Mike just said, I think most definitely the pipeline of technicians coming through. When you look at the demographic of a lot of the guys that walk the floor, you know, it is an aging industry, and we need to engage with young technicians and get them motivated and into the industry. And I think we've got plans to do that. You know, I don't think that's just necessarily an aviation thing. I think maybe that's a fundamental thing with society. We do need to get people wanting to get their hands dirty more. But you know, we know that that's what we need to do. So I say that's definitely one of the hazards that the industry has going forward. I don't know, Mike, you think that there's more that we talk all the time. There's more that we want to do. There's more that we need to give, and that the membership needs. But I think that's certainly the one that we're focused on right at the moment.
Interesting. Mike?
Yeah, I would say the biggest constraint's the workforce. Certainly that. If we're limiting our ability to install equipment because we don't have the technicians to do it, that's a concern. It's going to be a concern for everybody on this floor, for sure. So definitely that. I will say, I think the regulatory climate is actually helping us in a sense. The shift in the philosophy, our efforts with the regulatory affairs has certainly helped some of those things. Bringing new products into the market and getting those products into airplanes, I think is something you would probably expect us to say a few years ago, and I wouldn't say that today. There's still hurdles to clear. Competition from other industries and how we fit into that space. So when you think of all of the things we've talked about, urban air mobility, drones, all of those things, those are aircraft and those are electronic. How do we put our arms around it?
Yeah.
You know, and that's something we'll be focused on.
Well, as you know, we do programming for both AUVSI and AMA and the hobby drone and commercial drone side of things, plus because of a lot of research I do and some of my test work, I'm involved in a number of projects, and the one thing that's obvious right now is that the face of aviation is about to undertake a drastic change.
Right.
And it's not just unmanned, but it's going to be all the technologies that filter through from unmanned, autonomous and AI, the control systems, tracking, things of that nature. Propulsion has become a whole different ballgame, especially now that we're not only going more and more to electric propulsion, but we're having to constantly evaluate the health of those systems because in many cases, these systems are taking on criticalities they've never had before.
Sure.
So especially in the rotorcraft area. So I would imagine the opportunities for AEA and AEA members right now are extraordinary, and at the same time, it's kind of like banging your head against the wall. You just want to stop for a second so you feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeesh.
Right.
Where do you see the initial opportunities in that venue?
You want me to take that one, or?
Yeah, you take it.
You know, it's interesting because you know the number of those types of aircraft that are out there. A lot of them are small and recreational in use, but those are changing. We've got a couple sessions here this week talking about that very thing, about the size of those and the complexity and their ability to operate in the NAS and how that impacts it. But I think there's, just by sheer number alone, and by the fact that they are essentially aircraft over a certain weight, that's our space. And I think it's important for us to own the maintenance on that. And I think naturally, as we've already seen with some of the relationships that have been established in the industry, naturally they're looking to us to help, you know, on the repair side and the service side. So I think you can't expect it to just be a natural progression. We do have to go get that. But you know, you'll see some signs around the hall this week that says, you know, we're aviation's technology experts, and we are. And I think that's important to sell that to everybody who may not know us, that we are the resource for troubleshooting, for certification, for, you know, component repair, for installation. You should be coming to our shops, our manufacturers for those answers.
Gary, you come from the UK. UK has its own issues right now, both from the regulatory standpoint as well as a different style of a market to contend with.
Yep.
It also makes it obvious that AEA is truly an international organization with your chairmanship. Can you draw some parallels between the concerns that you see on the other side of the pond versus those we see here, and what lessons might either of us teach the other?
Are you talking from a political standpoint there, or?
I'll take them all. we don't go with these simple questions here.
Yeah, sure.
Mike will tell you. We put him on the hot seat many a time.
You know, it's interesting. 4 or 5 years ago, I think that we, both the US and the UK, would it be fair to say that politically there was not too much going on?
No.
So I think that
big time.
We from a UK perspective, we just don't know. You know, what we do know is that the UK CAA are doing a fantastic job of putting contingency plans in place, so that whatever the deal is that's struck as part of Brexit, they can handle it, and they'll be able to handle it. the UK is such a big player in the
Massive.
in European airspace, in worldwide aviation, that it's going to get fixed, right? And we have to go with that. We have to just trust that. Negotiations are at such a high level at the moment. Nobody quite knows what the fall down is, but yeah, we have to believe, and the conversations that I'm having with local inspectors, feeding up through, there's plans in place. So I think there's not a concern. In the short term, I think there's going to be some changes, some things that from an operational point of view that we need to do. But going forward, it'll work itself out, as they say.
We can only hope.
We can hope. I'm positive guy, so.
There you go. Well, no, when you look at the political and regulatory issues involved, it's a bit of a quagmire.
It is.
But we've dealt with worse before, so.
I think so.
Excuse me. So always have to deal with. Mike, with excuse me, with Gary's chairmanship, the emphasis on AEA as an international organization is certainly first and foremost. Do you feel now, or are you looking in the future to building up AEA on a more international scope?
Well, certainly. We are in 41 countries with our membership representation.
I keep seeing all these workshops and meetings and so forth all over the world and going, man, I wish I had that travel budget.
It's a challenge, and there's emerging markets that we're not in, right? And that's something we've got to look at and consider. I think you have to see where the business is being done. A few years ago there was a great focus on what was happening in China with regards to that, and not that it didn't materialize, it materialized in a different way. And so we're always looking at that, but with our base in Canada, certainly in the South Pacific with Australia and New Zealand, and then of course Europe, and all the countries represented there. We're doing quite a bit. We do feel like we're certainly an international organization, but we'll continue to look at Central and South America as an emerging market. We had a meeting there recently in Colombia with quite a good attendance talking about the focus of ADSB and the mandate down there. So we're going to continue to explore. The great thing is from a regulatory perspective, we have a tremendous resource that knows, all of the regulatory bodies, has relationships with all of them, and seemingly knows all of the rules in all of those different regions. So from that standpoint, which is oftentimes your foot in the door, we're in great shape. Bringing exhibits and training to those markets is something we can pretty easily do. We've demonstrated that before. So I can't tell you what the next region will be. We'll obviously keep our eyes focused on where we need to be and listen to our members and see where there's interest and go after that. But I feel like we're in good shape, even with a small staff, to expand globally. Absolutely.
And I think that notwithstanding the whole Brexit thing that's going on, there's a real push for harmonisation across all of the regulatory authorities. So it does make life a bit easier for us that when we train, it fits worldwide, right? So I think that's a big, and as you say, Rick Perry, he helps so much with that. He's such a fantastic resource for us.
Mr. Regulation.
He is Mr. Regulation. Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Politics, actually, of course.
You can ask him about that.
Yeah. Boy, I'll tell you what, you want to know what's going on in the Puzzle Palace, he's the man. It's extraordinary. He not only knows who's doing what and how often and where they are and so forth and so on, but what they had for breakfast. He's on top of it. It's kind of fun to watch somebody who's embraced what is otherwise an unpopular topic and just become so expert on it, and then as a result is able to really break through log jams.
And not only that, but he can train on it as well. Right? He understands it all, but he can pass that knowledge on.
Well, we get these calls every now and then when it comes to an avionics topic. It gets into something arcane. We just, what's Rick's number again? Just pass it on out, because the only guy you really want to consult on that, because end all be all. It works out pretty well in that regard. The current attitude on the part of the FAA, both under Mike Huerta, was kind of a breath of fresh air in a couple areas and not so much in others. It's been carried through somewhat by Mr. Elwell. I thought overall he's acquitted himself fairly well. Do you have any inclination at this point how things are going to go with this transition to a new administrator?
Actually, Rick probably is the better person to ask for that. In fact, I think he's got some, certainly had experience with Mr. Elwell. It's wait and see. We will certainly be making ourselves known in the process of the transition. It's kind of interesting. We're going through it. They're going through it. Right. So, wait and see for us. But the climate's good. We have an outstanding relationship at all levels within the administration.
There's a real trust, right? There's a real
Absolutely.
Trust.
And I think that'll carry forward. So I'm not concerned, certainly. I do think there's been some progress as things have shifted. The philosophies, we talked about that yesterday, the philosophies have shifted. We're well positioned to keep those things going. I think there might be some concern with the recent events. I think that's a distinct possibility.
They've got their work cut out for them.
They do.
And the crazy part is, whatever their real job is, media and public perception are only going to triple the complexity of what's coming, because the amount of misinformation out there right now is beyond belief.
Right. And we'll be monitoring that, helping to maybe clear the air on that to some degree. But we'll be focused on it, because if it impacts anything along the way, certification of products or installation of products, we've made so much progress to this point. And I think that's evidence in this exhibit hall with all the new products that are coming out. We don't want to stymie any of that with the momentum in the retrofit market. So we'll be focused on it.
At the same time, these calls from the Insta-pundits for criminal investigation and deep dives on the part of regulatory organizations in regards to how things have done about problems that are perceived and not necessarily real, certainly has to hit at everybody who's currently comfortable or at least knowledgeable of the regulatory environment they have to work in now, but have projects on the horizon, and they're wondering year, 2, 3 from now just what's going to impact them in regards to a change in regulatory climate that may come out of the hysteria for do something, not necessarily the right thing, but do something.
Well, and isn't that the world we live in now?
It is.
It's just the natural reaction to anything that happens.
Yeah.
It's this frenzied
that darn media
focus. We're all part of it, but really, and it's unfortunate, because I think there's probably some due diligence that has to happen there, some research and some exploration of all the things that have happened. But let's not jump to conclusions. And I think oftentimes that creates clickbait. That creates misinformation that gets you to read something that seemingly makes news that day, but isn't necessarily accurate. Yeah. And I think it's incumbent upon us as an association and as a news organization to our members to make sure we're sharing the right information and helping them, understand the situation, be educated, and not be concerned right off the bat of any immediate impact. Not saying there won't be. I'm just saying, let's take a step back, let the experts do their work, and draw a conclusion from that, and see if we can help them along the way.
As a pilot who has flown recreationally and professionally, and even worked quite a bit in the test community, I look at the avionics industry as this massive bridge. What avionics technologies have brought to aviation have bridged the gap in the shortcomings we've seen with older airframes, older power plant technologies, the need to understand what's happening with older power plant technologies, turbine, piston, and the like. There's no question that the avionics industry has led, and has led brilliantly. I mean, we start with flat panel and then start looking at where these devices have gone with the types of displays, the amount of information being presented, the way they've drilled down into all levels of aviation to provide additional functionality, additional intelligence, and more important, predictive data down the line. Can the avionics industry keep that up?
Do you know, it's interesting, because I think for years, every time I come to these shows, I get blown away. Bearing in mind,
me too, big time.
The stuff that these guys are manufacturing, there's no mandate to what they do, right? It's all customer driven. It's all, and I think what a lot of the manufacturers have done, they've got pilots on board. They've got pilots within their organizations that have said, this is what we need. You know, situational awareness. And that's where you've seen the drive from a lot of the manufacturers is towards the benefiting the pilots. What will help the pilot fly the aircraft better? And I do get staggered. And you're right, you think, well, what's next? What more can they do? And then they do it, right? And every year they do it.
And bring it on. I mean, seriously, the industry needs it. I think to a certain extent, what part of general aviation survived the worst of certain aspects of whether it be economics or what have you. I think the avionics industry and the functionality, you know, glass cockpit and what have you, saved GA from really taking a dive.
I think that's absolutely correct. I really do. I mean, you know, when we had the me owning a relatively small Part 23 repair shop, life is so much easier when you've got these great products, right? And yeah, there's a high value to some of those products. But when the customers, you get a demo and you show them what the equipment's all about, it sells itself, right? It sells itself. And so yeah, I hats off to those guys, because they invest the time, they invest the money to get that equipment there, and they make it so easy for us as dealers to sell and install that equipment.
So Mike, how do you drive the industry to keep doing, keep innovating, keep exceeding?
Another excellent question, right? I think
easy one.
Yeah, certainly. Well, first of all, allowing the products. You know, it starts with safety, right? Pilot ease is right up there, but situational awareness, safety in the cockpit, safety of flight, reducing the very low number of accidents we already have, but continuing to reduce those is probably the driver, and always will be. What I think has outpaced everything is how these manufacturers arrive at getting that into low-cost, lightweight, easily fitted, easily configurable products that actually have a shelf life on the aircraft. I think we're starting to see that. The hardware changes still come, but more and more we're starting to see changes within that hardware, software configuration, software updates to some of those things. And there's some philosophy shift on that manufacturing process, I think. I'm really excited to see what that brings next, because you're starting to see that already at this show. I think you saw some of that yesterday in some of the announcements. But I marvel, at how Moore's Law applies out here. It's really impressive. But I also think with the new airframes, back to urban air mobility and some of the things that will drive that, I think you're going to have pressure from maybe not your everyday avionics manufacturer that's pushing for technologies to fit in for their purpose or for their airframe, and it's going to drive our members to outpace them with new technology. So I think I said yesterday in the opening, I think it's going to accelerate. ADS-B is still a focus, and it will be through the end of the year, and probably a little bit of a post-2020 fitment period there, but our shop's are already talking about what's on the horizon.
There you go.
And what they could be outfitting. So I'm looking forward to what's next.
And we do definitely have a hard break coming up at 2020. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'll let you in on a little secret. We have this edition we do every year on April 1st, our April Fool's Day.
Right. And
we have a lot of fun coming up with really insane stories and ideas. And the one we have is that the FAA will, I don't know if they have these in the UK, but in major cities, if you don't pay your traffic tickets, they boot the cars. They put this immobilization device on the wheel.
Okay.
You can't go anywhere until they unlock that after you pay tickets.
Right.
Well, the FAA is going to start heart booting airplanes after January 1, 2020. That's the big joke for that. We'll see what happens. I'm afraid we're going to be giving them ideas.
I'll check with you on April 2nd to see how that went for you.
Yeah, really. Right. There you go. We shall see. Gentlemen, I can't tell you how much we've appreciated your time, and of course the immense work you do on behalf of the association, the industry, and all of us who enjoy flying so much or work in it and still enjoy it. More important than anything else, please keep us up to date on what you see, what's happening. We've been a real-time news service for 23 years, and to be perfectly honest, it's hard to keep up. So intelligence from experts like yourselves is a real big deal, and we'd certainly appreciate hearing from you whenever you think there's something that the rest of the industry needs to hear about. We thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, thank you. And thank you for your continued coverage of our association, our show,
yes, very much
and everything we're doing. We appreciate that.
Well, I got to tell you, it's a pleasure. We've said it time and time again. We think AEA may be, if not the best, but certainly one of the best run associations we've worked with. And we know this from working with you year after year after year, and bothering Jeff and bothering Aaron and bothering Paula and we bothered everybody.
Yeah.
But you guys get it done. And in the long run in aviation, isn't that job one? So,
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it.
Gary, thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
Mike, thank you.
Aero-News Network's coverage of the 62nd Annual AEA International Convention and Trade Show, live from Palm Springs, California, is brought to you in part by the following sponsors.
Now, the MD302 Standby Attitude Module, SAM, is even smarter. Introducing the MD32 Magnetometer, designed specifically for SAM. This optional magnetometer delivers independent heading reference. Its unique mounting flexibility, compact size, and convenient cockpit calibration ensures an easy, low-cost installation every time. Available from your local avionics dealer.